day after school on the streetcar, and nobody told me I shouldn't ride the streetcar during the streetcar strike because they were bombing streetcars. I was the only one on the streetcar that went to the center for my Tomatora training. I remember Mr. Katz and Mr. Wolfson, and who were our teachers, and we went 3 times a week and thought that that's the way things had to be done. The interesting thing was that when we went to Tomatora, it was in the days when being Jewish wasn't really the best thing to do, and we used to cover our books so that nobody could see that they were Hebrew books when we went to school. My growing up years were wonderful. I had a wonderful teenage life. I want to go back for a minute to my parents. My parents were Sidney and Yetta Goldberg. My mother was quite active in the community, very active in Beth Israel Synagogue. She was president of the sisterhood. My father was a little bit more laid back. My grandmother, Sophie Graulish, who lived in New York all of her life, moved to Omaha when she was about 92 years old, and she actually died here at the age of 100. So we go back to Omaha for a long time. My grade school years, I think, were uneventful except for going to Tomatora. But in high school, I was really quite active. I was the president then of the Roundtable of Jewish Youth. I was chairman of the youth campaign for the Federation, president of the Girls Club in Nos Israel. So I was a macher in my teenage years. Where do I go from there?
I want to hear a little bit about your high school years,
Who would think?
your friends and so on.
Who were your friends?
Oh, okay. I gotta go back.
Who you graduated with? No, you're now in high school.
All right. I started Central High School when I was 12 years old, because that was the day when they used to skip people. So I missed that whole period of just talking about boys. Right away I went from dolls into going with boys. I had lots of friends. Most of my childhood friends included Betty Cookland-Rubin, Ida Epstein-Richards, Etta Gorelick Epstein, and we hung out a lot. Our whole life really was centered at the center. All of our social life was at the center. We used to walk from Central High across the street to the center to watch the boys, and the boys always came to watch the girls. Sunday, we spent the whole day at the center watching basketball games, doing our club things, and we used to have tea dances at the center on Sunday, and that was always fun. I didn't know that a teenager could have a social life outside of the Jewish Community Center, and that's the way we grew up. In 1941, when Pearl Harbor was attacked, we were all at the center on that Sunday. I remember the boys who were then entering college were wondering if they would get a chance to finish their college career. The girls were all wondering if they'd ever have dates again if all the boys went to the Army. We couldn't conceive of what war was. We couldn't conceive of where Pearl Harbor was. We couldn't conceive of what was going to happen. It was a very strange day that day. I remember going home and talking to my parents about it, and even although my father had been in World War I, even they couldn't relate to an attack on Pearl Harbor here in the Midwest. What was it going to affect us? When we first came here, my father worked as a manager in one of the Epstein Theater Corporations, and in time he bought the Lothrop Theater on 24th and Lothrop. We lived on 24th and Spencer, so it was just a short walk to go to his place. My friends, the boys in our little group, included Yale Richards, Milt Gus, Leonard Lewis, Max Osterman, who has since passed away, but there were about a dozen boys who used to walk from 22nd and Grace, where everybody lived, up to my house, and they would sit at my house for a while, and then they would go over to Reed's ice cream place and buy ice cream. Then they'd come back to see me. They never took me for ice cream. Occasionally, my father would let them into the theater, and that was always a big deal to be able to go to the Lothrop for free. It was a fun time. We didn't have money, but we had fun, and it was a very close kind of group. That was also in the days when there was kind of a class system. The kids on North 24th Street didn't really associate with the rich kids in Dundee. But that was okay. We had our own little group and we were happy. I had an older sister. My sister was Shirley Goldberg Fisher, who married Mort Fisher when she was 18, died just a few years ago. She was a more laid back than I was. I was a troublemaker, and she was the nice, pretty one that stayed home. But we had a wonderful family life. I remember when my father owned the theater, it made meal times very difficult because he had to be at the theater early. But Friday night was our night. We just never thought about doing anything else. When he came home from the theater at 11:30 at night, we sat down to play bridge. And my father and I were always partners, and my sister and my mother were partners, and we kept a running score for many years. And the Friday night before my sister got married was it was almost like a wake, because we sat there and knew it was going to be the last Friday night game we had. At that point, I think my father and I were about 100,000 points ahead of them. But it was a wonderful togetherness time. And I have very fond memories of my youth. Holidays, Jewish holidays in Omaha when I was a teenager is much different than the holidays my children observed or that we see in Phoenix, where we're now living. It was kind of a social event. First of all, we never rode on the holidays. We always walked. I lived on 24th and Spencer, and we used to walk down to 18th and Chicago. We all walked. And then we'd go from 18th, go into the synagogue and say hi to our parents, and then take off to 19th and Burt, and play around with the boys there, and then come back to 18th and Chicago. On the holidays, my sister used to host the holiday events. We would go back to her house for lunch on the first day of Rosh Hashanah and stay on. We'd stay on there for dinner. The afternoon, we would go visit other relatives, and it was just a real family time, a real fun time.
While you were in high school, did you have a job or did you work part-time?
I worked one afternoon a week. I worked either Sunday afternoon or Sunday night at my father's theater being cashier. So I liked to do the Sunday night bit so I could have my Sunday afternoon at the center. My sister really didn't care, so she took the other time. But other than that, I had no other job.
Do you remember how much they charged to get into the movies then?
Oh yeah, I think it was 15 cents for the adults and 5 cents for kids,
And popcorn.
5 cents for a great big bag of popcorn. I often think when I go to the movies now and pay $2.50 for a box of popcorn, my father would not believe it. It was such a good time. I hope my children enjoyed their childhood as much as I enjoyed mine. In grade school, I went to Lothrop grade school, and I think at that point there was only one other Jewish student there, and that was Lois Siegel Endelman, who incidentally, we grew up, kind of parted ways, and after we were married, she moved in next door to us. So our children were friends, and now the grandchildren are friends. It just, we don't see that in Phoenix, the whole period of going on.
You mentioned about the things that you did in high school. What did you do specifically?
I was a National Forensic League champion debater. I was a debater. I say I was very active in the youth Jewish community. I was president of everything I could be president of. I can remember the leaders, the youth leaders then, like Ruth Neuhaus, Katz. What was his name? I forget his first name. Of course, I remember Paul Verrett, who was a perpetual. He was always there. I don't know when he ever went home, but he was always there. Kayla Franklin. I remember all of those center people who were part of my family because I spent so much time there.
Tell me a little bit about your father and mother's relatives.
We came to Omaha because my father had 3 sisters living here. Rose Epstein, Minnie Epstein, and Gussie Turkle. Minnie and Rose were the 2 girls that were married to 2 brothers. And their children, of course, have been likewise longtime members of the Omaha community and leaders. Rose had 2 children, Jack Epstein and Shirley, who became Shirley Berman, who also became president of the Beth Israel Sisterhood. Gussie's children were Sam and Ralph Turkle, both dentists. Sam is deceased, but Ralph is still here. And Simi Turkle, who died at a very Minnie's children were Sydney Epstein and Sylvia Epstein Greenberg and Evelyn Epstein Simon. All of them since are deceased. But their children, Sylvia's children, Sandy and Kathy, were friends of my children. And the whole thing perpetuates from year to year, from generation to generation.
And growing up, was there a lot of family getting together?
Oh, yeah. Passovers. It's interesting. When I went to Henry W. Yates School when we first moved here, before we got our own house, my Aunt Minnie lived across the street from the school. And the Turkle kids were in the neighborhood. Everybody was in the neighborhood. And all of us would say, all of our parents would say, if the weather's bad, when you get out, for lunchtime, go to Aunt Minnie's. So Aunt Minnie's door was always open. She never knew how many kids were going to wander in, but that's where he went. Aunt Minnie's house was also the place for the Passover Seder. And between the brothers and the sisters and the children, there were probably 30, 40 people at every Seder. And that was wonderful memories. In fact, this past week when I was having a little family reunion, Ralph Turkle and I are the only ones left of that original group. But we all have beautiful memories of those days.
Can you remember the houses that weren't air conditioned?
Oh, of course, of course.
And before
Houses were
television?
Huh?
Before television?
Before television. I said this to a young person that I was working with when I was in California, that we didn't have television till whatever. She said, well, how'd you raise your kids? It never occurred to her that you could raise kids without television. No, there was no air conditioning. We used to take blankets to go out and sleep on the lawn at Central High School because that was the coolest place in town. That was fun. I remember the community sings in Elmwood Park. And the kids used to go to Peony Park swimming, and then we would go to Elmwood Park where the parents would be with picnic suppers, and then we would go to the community sing. And I often think the parents would come out like at 2 o'clock in the afternoon with egg salad, potato salad, and all this mayonnaise. It'd stand out in the hot sun all afternoon. Then we would eat it. Then they'd take it home. We'd have it for lunch the next day. And I think about all the precautions on health. Hey, we all survived. But even eating mayonnaise 3 days later.
It's amazing that you were able to get by during those years without television.
Without television, without a lot of things the kids have now. I remember what my niece once saying to my sister, how did you live? Oh, she said, how was your toasters before? My sister said you had to push it down before it popped up. She couldn't even believe that. My sister, incidentally, had four children. Ronnie Fisher Peterson, who was living in Phoenix. Barbara Fisher was also in Phoenix. Molly Fisher was also in Phoenix. And her only daughter remaining in Omaha is Carol Fisher Brocky. Carol's married to Peter Brocky. Although Carol's daughter Laura is living in Phoenix. And so I have nieces, great nieces, and then Laura has a child, so that's a great niece that I have living there.
So Phoenix has become Omaha Southwest, hasn't it?
Exactly. And we do some of the family celebrations there. My niece Ronnie always has Thanksgiving, and Carol comes in for that. So we're still pretty close family.
What do you remember of old Omaha, going back as a child?
We didn't do a lot of moving around. We stayed within our circle. I remember the synagogues. I remember North 24th Street, of course, where I used to go with my mother. I remember Sugar's, where we went every Sunday to buy corned beef because my father was in the theater and he couldn't come home for meals. So every Sunday was corned beef sandwiches, which we brought to him. I remember all the I remember Forbes Bakery. I remember many of the stores on North 24th Street. Other than that, other than having a friend in South Omaha, there was no reason for me ever to go that far. So we were kind of pretty confined to our own neighborhoods.
Did you get to what was once known as downtown Omaha?
Of course, under Brandeis under the clock. That's where we all went. If you were going downtown, you were going to meet anybody who was Brandeis under the clock. So if you stood under the clock at Brandeis for any of the time, you saw a lot of Omaha people there. That was standard. Those were the days when it was not expected that every girl was going to go to college. In fact, very few girls went to college. Girls were supposed to go through high school and then maybe go to business school and then become secretaries. Maybe if a father could afford to send a kid to school, There were some girls that went to school to become teachers. I was one of the very few who were allowed to go to college. I was the only girl in my social group who had the opportunity to go to college. However, my parents were not in a position to send me away to school. I had to go locally. At that time, the only local schools were the old Omaha University, the community college, or Creighton University. Creighton, of course, was a better school, but I had trouble getting in because I was a girl, and mostly they were taking men, and I was Jewish. Sophie Neveloff at that time, who seemed to know everybody and seemed to have a hand in everything, and was able, she says, "You want to go to Creighton? Don't worry, I'll get you in," which she did. She got me into Creighton. Unfortunately, I was only there for a year when the war broke out, and all the men at Creighton University were gone, and Creighton became a cadet school for the Army, so their regular academic year was suspended.
What did you study while you were there?
Talk about your.
I wasn't sure. Actually, I was talking about law. Yale Richards and I at one time, because we were friends, were talking about going into a law office together. But of course, that never came to be. But he went on. He did very well.
What did you study while you were there?
I'm trying to remember. It was kind of a pre-law kind of thing. First year at Creighton. Are you ready for me? My first year at Creighton, Catholic students were required to take religion. Non-Catholic students were required to take a class called philosophy. After a couple of classes on philosophy, a very wonderful priest there, because Creighton was a Jesuit college, called Father Bowdern, asked me if I would counsel with him privately rather than go through the philosophy class. Now you have to remember, I was 16 years old when I started, and I started counseling with Father Bowdern, and he was wonderful. I realize now he was trying to convert me. We went through the whole business until we got to the part about the Trinity, and I kept questioning him. At one time he got frustrated. He says, "You have to believe." I says, "Not if I stay Jewish, I don't." And so I got a good grade in the course, but that was the impetus for me to understand Judaism on an adult basis. So I'll always be grateful for him, because of him I was able to go on my own and study and understand really what Jewish life was about. I do have to tell you, though, I gave my parents a few uncomfortable moments when I came home and asked them questions like, why don't we, why do we? And while they were Jewish spiritually, they really didn't have this kind of knowledge. They couldn't answer my questions. They were very nervous about it, but fortunately I stayed Jewish, and I'm happy to do that. I think there were two things that influenced my feeling about being Jewish in my adult life. One was Father Bowdern at Creighton. The other was the opportunity I had to go to Brandeis Camp Institute, which was sponsored by Hadassah. It was the first time I had ever seen a Havdalah service. It was the first time I had ever observed Shabbos as it should be observed, and that made me Jewish too. This then, of course, was during the war years, which were an unnatural time for teenage people. My friends, all the boys were off in the Army. All of my girlfriends and I were home, and all kinds of romance was carried on by letter, because we had no other social contact. I do remember the Jewish Community Center at that time used to have USO dances in the basement of the old Jewish Community Center. I wasn't allowed to go because I wasn't 18, but I snuck in. Nobody ever knew it, but I snuck in. I was married in 1945 to Bob Gorelick, who came home on an emergency leave because his mother was sick, and we were able to have a very quick wedding. And then I moved with him to Wichita, Texas, where he was enrolled, where he was serving. After the war, we came back to Omaha, and subsequently we had 3 children. Our firstborn was Howard Gorelick, who grew up in Omaha, went to graduated from Westside High School. While he was in high school, he was an active leader in ACA. He then went on to Nebraska University. My son Jerry was the second born. Jerry Gorelick also went to Westside High School. But since Howard was in ACA, Jerry decided he would be active in the Temple Youth Group, so that's where he was. Incidentally, I was a teacher at Temple for probably 15 years. I was also the leader of the Temple Youth Group for Temple for 15 years. Jerry went on to go to school at University of Wisconsin and then back to the University of Nebraska. My daughter Marcia Gorelick, now married to Steve Pittler, went to Westside High School, went to school in Missouri, and then in Arizona, University of Arizona. Graduated as a Spanish teacher and went back to Westside High School to teach Spanish. Howard and Jerry did not remain in Omaha, but Marcia did. Howard has 2 children, Amy, who is married and living in Denver, and Dan, who is married and living in Phoenix, as it happened. By chance, he came to Phoenix when he graduated college for a job interview with Motorola, and it clicked. So he's been in Phoenix for 10 years, and we've had a very close relationship with him, and that's been wonderful. Jerry and his wife Lorraine have no children. Marcia and Steve have 3 children. Lisa, who is their oldest, is a second-year medical student in New York. David, who's graduated the University of Boston, is working in Boston in some kind of engineering field, which I don't understand. And the youngest one, Kimmy, is a junior at Washington University. So we don't know where all these kids are going to settle, but if you have a few hours, I can tell you how wonderful all of them are, all 5 of them.
Paige.
Huh?
Paige.
Well, Dan is now married to a wonderful woman named Paige, so I'll let Mort talk about his grandchildren, which are also my grandchildren who live in Arizona, but I'll let him do that part. When Howard graduated college, he came back to Omaha and didn't quite know what he was going to do with his life. At that time, Nick Newman was a good friend of mine, and I said to Nick Newman, would you talk to my kid and maybe you can give him some direction? So Howard went to talk to Nick Newman, who put him to work for Hinky Dinky, doing some writing of their I guess it was their orientation program. He went on to work for Nick Newman in Supermarket Interstates, and eventually this became his career, and today he's the vice president of real estate for the Safeway Corporation. So he's living in Denver and doing quite well. An interesting story about Jerry is when he graduated college, and he was kind of floundering too. At that time, Mort and I were married. So he came to California to try his luck there. And while he was living with us, we were still in an apartment. He went down to the corner 7-Eleven and ran into a girl that he had gone to high school with, who lived in our apartment complex. They realized that they had gone to high school together and graduated together, and subsequently they got married. She likewise was from Omaha, so again, the Omaha, California, Phoenix ties just kept growing and growing. Marcia went to University of Arizona kind of because she wanted to be with Steve Pittler, who was her high school romance, and they subsequently got married. And Steve, of course, has been the president of the Federation and has been very much a leader in the community. Marcia and Jody Malashak chaired the Maccabea Games that were in Omaha a few years ago. Now Marcia's the co-chairman of the women's campaign. So they are heavily involved in Jewish life at Omaha. And I'm very proud of all of them because they've all done great things with their lives and they're great kids. And I'll be happy to go on forever about it. When I started looking for a job when I was out of college, it was in the days when there was overt anti-Semitism. My maiden name was Goldberg, and I went to apply for a job, and they'd look at the application and say, Goldberg, that's Jewish, isn't it? We don't hire Jews. I know that that's strange to the kids today, but that's the way it was. I was getting quite discouraged, and it was at the very end of the day that I walked in. I wanted a job, something in communication, advertising, writing, because that was my field. I walked into an advertising agency run by a little Irish man, Mort Duff. And I said, I want a job. He says, Goldberg, that's Jewish, isn't it? By that time, I was furious. And I says, yeah, that means nothing except I'm a very good employee. And I started walking out. He says, now, wait a minute. I can't have you walking out of here and having people thinking I'm anti-Semitic. What do you want to do? I says, I'd like to be a copywriter. He says, well, I have no openings for a copywriter. Would you take an entrance level position? I said, yes, I would do anything to get my feet in. So he gave me an entrance level position as a file clerk. And I have to tell you, I'm probably the worst file clerk in the whole world. I used to get bored, so by the end of the day, everything went into a miscellaneous file. And after a week or two of that, he looked, he says, you know, you're going to ruin my whole filing system. He says, I have to give you a copywriting job. So that was my very first job. And I stayed with that until after Howard was born, and even worked at home with that for a while. I then was an at-home mother, and when Howard was like a junior or senior in high school, I knew that if he were going to go away to college, that I'd have to go back to work. It was something I wanted very badly for him because I didn't have a chance to go away to college, and I wanted him to go away to college. So at that time, I had two chances for a job. Paul Grossman was the chairman of the Jewish Press Committee. He says, do you want to work for the Jewish Press? Well, I didn't know. I'd never done a paperwork before. There was also an opening in Jimmy Lipsy and Millard Rosenberg's advertising agency, and I considered that. And I chose the Jewish Press job because the parking was better, and I didn't want to have to park downtown. So I came to the Jewish Press. I had a corner office with Kayla Franklin, and I was working part-time for $50 a week. And very soon after that, I decided, hey, I'm doing the full-time job. Why shouldn't I be paid full-time? So I went full-time at $100 a week, and I became the editor of the Jewish Press. And it was probably the most satisfying job I've ever had. I helped the press grow. It helped me grow. And I was with the Jewish Press for 10 years. After that, after Mort and I were married and I went to California, again, I went into a job that I knew nothing about. I became an employee of a savings and loan company when I didn't even know what a savings and loan did. But eventually I worked myself up to be the director, vice president of marketing for this association. So those were the three jobs I had. All three of them, incidentally, were on a trial basis. I was never a permanent employee of any three of them. The first one lasted 10 years, the second one lasted 10 years, the third one lasted 16 years, and I've never been a permanent employee anymore.
What are some of your memories of working with the Jewish Press here in Omaha?
The Jewish Press job was probably the best job I had because of the opportunities it gave me. Gave me a chance to meet many, many people. I had a chance to interview Rabbi Abraham Heschel. It was my first trip to Israel was there, where I met with David Ben-Gurion, where I met Golda Meir, where I had a chance to go to Washington and have an interview with President Johnson. It was an extraordinary period of my life where I met all kinds of wonderful people. On a local basis, it also gave me a chance to meet a lot of people I wouldn't have ever known. In fact, I had a little group of Jewish ladies who used to call me before every election to tell me and ask me, how should I vote? And they used to sit there with sample ballots, and I'd say, well, I can't tell you how to vote. I can only tell you what I did. And they used to follow. So I figure I must have had 10 or 12 votes in every election. I had a chance to develop a bunch of young people as youth leaders by introducing the Teen Talk column in the Jewish Press, so that I had the kids' involvement in the paper. I was a one-woman newspaper for many years, and then at one point they said, okay, now you can hire an assistant. So I had an ad in the Jewish Press for an assistant, and this young woman walked in with a very, very good English accent. She had a portfolio with her, but I was so entranced with her accent that I never looked at the portfolio. And that was Linda Mervish, who became my assistant and was with me until the time I left the press.
Hi, I'm Mort Greenberg. Among my claims to fame is I'm married to Micky. I was born in New Jersey, lived in the East, and studied in the East. Among other things, kind of extensive Jewish education, Hebrew school, advanced high school, yeshiva college, not because I wanted to be a rabbi, but because in my religious family, that was my father's concept of what a good Jewish American young man ought to know, and how he ought to be prepared for life. My father was Greenberg. My mother was Blanche. I was blessed with really very lovely, caring, loving parents. And I had two brothers. My oldest brother was Meyer, who became a rabbi, and unfortunately died a few years back. My second brother was my brother Av, short from his Hebrew name was Abraham, who became an attorney. And he too is no longer among the living. And then I have a sister, Ruth Greenberg Ashman Schwartz, who lives now in Toms River, New Jersey, at the age of 87, or almost 87, and unfortunately is ailing. And then I come. We all had similar kinds of educations in terms of the Jewish character of our training. I had the opportunity and served in World War II in Europe, from D-Day +1 all the way to Berlin. Among the highlights of that experience, I must tell you, is when the war ended in Europe, and we had observed Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur in the major hall in Berlin, and there were hundreds of Allied soldiers, Russians, French, British, American, and civilians, including some survivors who outlasted Hitler and outlasted the Nazi regime. That was a momentous experience. With that as part of the background, I was tremendously motivated and concerned with what was happening to Jews in Europe, and always I was an important Jewish National Fund collector as a youth and as a young adult. Also what was happening in Israel. So when the war ended, I was involved a little bit in a surreptitious collection of arms, which we was trying to send off to Haganah for Israeli production, for the protection of Jews in Israel. With this as the kind of background, I ended up, although I too had planned to be a lawyer and serve and practice with my brother, I ended up temporarily working within the Jewish community, in the Jewish Community Center field, in the Jewish field. Eventually that became my career. And so I spent, 20 some odd years before I arrived here in Omaha. I was invited to Omaha by a committee of the board of Federation, among other things because I had experience in opening and building and planning of new Jewish community centers. Omaha was the third in which I was able to work and to create something that was long-lasting. When I came, the Federation owned a piece of land on the side of the hill just east of West Roads, on the eastern border of West Roads. And that was to be the site of the new center. When I raised with leadership the inability to do facilities, the difficulty in parking, the difficulty in creating ball fields, general access issues, with absolutely no room for expansion, they recognized that had some validity, and so we ended up deciding to look for another site, to which, and of course ended up, and really finally, two of us separately, simultaneously spotted this area here where the Jewish community complex is now housed. I had the privilege of working with some very interesting people and some very good people while we were doing this. Well, part of what I brought to the mix was a knowledge of the kind of planning that is necessary to create a good Jewish center. I don't want to seem critical, but I guess it is. But the existing center in Omaha was about 50 years out of date. Well, let me change that. Was at least 30 years out of date. Major changes, not just in terms of population shifts, but in terms of what centers did, and the kind of programming, the kind of services it offered to the community, were ones which nobody here seemed to be concerned with. And so part of my asset for this planning, for this process, was that I had that experience. And so among the first things we did was to create a broad planning committee, set of committees. We involved 300 lay people in the community who met with professionals in their fields to study the various opportunities that a good center could provide. I also took a committee of lay leadership to visit some other new recently built centers, to meet with their presidents and their chief execs to understand more about how good centers operated. Also took the existing staff. Micky reminds me that what I was saying seemed to suggest that the existing center at 20th and Dodge had little value and little import to the people who it served. On the contrary, my concern was more that the new center would be as good and as meaningful, as welcoming, as important to the young people and the adults in this community as the old center had been in its heyday. And I'm pleased that Micky had the chance to enjoy it at its heyday. And my job was to recreate using the new style and the new methodology, that kind of intense enjoyment and pleasure and value that a good Jewish community center could provide to the world. Well, we went through the normal process. We went through an extensive process of building lay support for the financial expectations of what a center, what building would cost. And so over the years, we developed an advisory council of major financial factors in the Jewish community who endorsed the project. We presented the final report, a recommendation as to what the new center could be like and ought to provide. They endorsed it, and that was important because among other things, it involved them into the decision-making, which implied their strong support for the project. I must also say that one of the side values of the involvement of so many people in the study process was that they too became activists on behalf of the center, both in terms of the capital campaign and certainly in terms of the membership, and to be participants in strong service committees for teens, for preschool, for athletics, for the cultural programs, for the library, and so on. Well, I've spoken at this point just about the center. My job also, I was the director of the Federation. And so doing the centerpiece, it was a major part, but it was not the only part of the function that I performed. I will tell you that when we got our plans all completed, and we designed the building involving an architect finally out of Minneapolis, who had built the center in Minneapolis. And it moved into our campaign in 1972. We really received very strong community support, participation, including from people in the non-Jewish community. And it was a real hallmark, it was a real recognition of what the Jewish community values were, and how the Jewish community was also seen in the non-Jewish community as good community citizens and good, responsible activists in terms of all kinds of causes, not just Jewish causes. As it happens, the year in which we ran this campaign, we had, over the 15 months, really, we had some pretty phenomenal fundraising in this Jewish community. We had a philanthropy campaign, we had a building campaign, we had another philanthropy campaign, and then we had the Yom Kippur War campaign. So in about 15 months, we started the building campaign around June, and next year, in October, we had the Yom Kippur campaign. Well, over that period, we raised, if I remember correctly, more than $10 million from the Jewish community in support of their obligations or what they accepted as their obligations. And I think that's the fantastic credit of this community. I want to say a word about the staff. I don't want to exclude them from anything, and I don't want to suggest that all this wonderful accomplishment was made without the participation of some very talented people. But over the course of the first couple of years, as we were planning and making changes, we accumulated a very fine, accomplished, competent staff, professionals, non-professionals, people, all of whom were excellent in their positions, from the Home for the Aged director, at that time it was the Chair.
That was the Dr. Cheryl.
Yeah, well, Chair what? Oh, and Chair Chapman at the Chapman Pavilion. The Jewish Family Service with, I forget her name now. But internally within the Federation operation and within the center operation, until we finally hired a professionally trained center director who also was able to bring outside experience into play to help make this programmatically and operationally more sound. I don't mean to neglect that fabulous editor of the Jewish Press, with whom over the course of the years I found myself, because of the nature of the campaigns, and because I thought her advice and reactions and suggestions tended to be good, I found myself using her experience and her knowledge to a greater and greater extent.
Agent Molly Dillman.
Huh?
Molly Dillman.
Oh, yeah. Oh, heaven forbid. Heaven forbid. Of course, and I don't mean to exclude the late Molly Dellman, who was Miss Everything, who was a wonderful, well, when I came, she was a teen worker, and she went from that to becoming the seniors director. Fabulous, fabulous Molly, who was all things to all people. I was going to always say mother of the earth kind of thing. And her contribution to the community, I think, cannot be overestimated, overvalued. If I may now move off and tell you something about my children. I am fortunate to have 3 children. None were born here. My oldest child, Sarah, was a student at Harvard and Radcliffe when we moved here. So she really never established any strong base in the Omaha area. My second child, my son Alan, was a high school senior when we moved here, and he fit in very well. He became active in ACA, and was some limited athletic skills, but he still has many friendships here in this community, which is just lovely. In fact, he was up this weekend and had a chance to visit with some of his old buddies and so on. My youngest is my daughter Nancy, who was then in middle school, and she had the chance to grow up here, and she made friends, and this is where she started her dating. And there are a couple of people I still remember coming to the house. At this point, none of these children live here. Sarah lives in the outskirts of Washington, D.C., where she works for the government.
Yes. What does she do in Washington, D.C.?
Well, Sarah's an attorney. Sarah has degrees in social work, and she's an attorney and works in the Bureau of Land Management, work in dispute resolution. My youngest daughter lives in Fort Collins, Colorado, is married to Mike. I'm sorry, my oldest daughter Sarah is married to Craig, who is the brother of
Jerry's wife.
of Jerry's wife. So they met at the wedding, and so we're related to that family on both sides. They also have no children. My youngest, go back to my youngest child, decided late in life that it was important to earn a living. So she got her master's in accounting, was working towards a partnership in a CPA firm in Fort Collins, and is anticipating either going out on her own to create her own company. Now, I skipped my middle child, my son Alan, only because when we retired, we moved to Scottsdale because that's where my son Alan and his wife Cindy live. They were in the process of having children. We decided when we did retire that we wanted to be active grandparents and enjoy the life with children. That's really how we ended up in Arizona, and have loved every bit of it, even the heat. Alan, my son, is an anesthesiologist that's been in practice for over 20 years. I don't know why they call it practice. I mean, he's really performing quite well, and we've been very fortunate. Now, they have 3 magnificent children, which makes us very fortunate because between us, we now have 10 grandchildren, which we share. Living with these children in Phoenix, allows Micky to enjoy and have all the pleasures of being the resident grandmother. And it's exactly how she is treated and loved. So we do everything now that we have time and the inclination. We go to basketball games, we go to soccer matches, we go. Alan and Cindy have 3 children. The oldest is Zach, who is at this moment 17 and a half. And Zach is entering his senior year in high school. Zach is an outstanding student. He just This is grandfather bragging. He just scored a 2340 on the SAT, the new SAT, where the maximum is 2400. Zach is a skilled basketball player and just returned from Israel, where he was a member of the United States Maccabi youth basketball team. He is a talented writer. He is really quite poised for a 17-year-old. He's being romanced by a number of colleges who would like to have him come, both to go to school for academic reasons, because he is a tremendous student, and perhaps even to play some basketball. The next child is Mari, who is a 15-year-old beauty who also bright, writes poetry, personable. She's not just, I said she's beautiful. And is a soccer player. So she is going into her sophomore year in high school. As it happens, the same school where Zach goes, and the same school where their mother Cindy is a part-time special ed teacher. The third child is Jordan. Jordan is 12 and a half, and when the family went to Israel this summer, they had the opportunity to have Jordan bat mitzvahed in Jerusalem. At a ceremony, unfortunately, which we were not able to attend. It's another really beautiful child, both physically and intellectually, and in her style. Very warm and cuddly to us both, particularly to Micky, which pleases me no end. We really are enjoying our life with our grandchildren.
I do have to say that I've lived a very good life. I had a happy childhood. I certainly had a wonderful career life. Met lots of interesting people. I've done lots of interesting things. But I really think the best thing I've ever done is to produce 3 very special children who in turn have produced some very special grandchildren. And that's my claim to immortality. And to all my kids, I want to say, I love you up to the sky.
You can't sum up very easily, or I can't, what my life has been and what my life is like. But to the children, to the grandchildren, to Sarah, Alan, and Nancy, to Marcia, Howard, and Jerry, and to all of our grandchildren. I'll try to do it chronologically. You have Dan, you have Lisa, you have Amy, you have David, and Kimberly. You have Zach, and Mari, and Jordan. You really are the joys of our lives, certainly of mine, and I know of Micky's. In a sense, you are us in the future. And we live vicariously through you, even though we're people in our own right. And we only wish you the very best. And I repeat Micky's closing comment, which has become our family motto: we love you up to the sky.